Yo, thanks for joining us in the Affecting Our Altruism podcast. This show brings you the voices of people who are taking on some of the biggest problems of our time. Some of them are informed by the principles of effective altruism, while some people have a completely different view. All of them care deeply about making the world a better place. Mario Gibney is a co-founder of AIGS Canada, Artificial Intelligence and Governance and Safety Canada. He's a co-founder and director of partnerships there. And I find his story remarkable because it broke my preconceptions that the only people who can make a difference in AI safety are the engineer and the mathematicians. I learned that this is wrong. Everyone has a role to play in creating the governance regime for this emerging technology. So we're really grateful that Mario has taken time out of his day to come and talk to us. Have a listen. Hey Mario, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, today I wanted to talk about what you're working on and also what inspires you and keeps you going in the work you do. Tell me, what are you about?
My job is AI catastrophic risk reduction. And so I've been involved in this about 2 years, and I've worked on a variety of projects. In relation to effective altruism it wasn't the first way I got introduced to this cause area. A lot of kind of core effective altruist organizations and arguments and ideas have been pretty influential in my thinking, and has also been helpful in me kind of meeting other people to collaborate with and understanding what projects might be useful in this space.
Yeah, thanks. That is, what you're about is amazing. This is an extremely gigantic issue, extremely gigantic problem. And I'm interested in learning more about you and how you relate to the problem and the work you do. Can you tell me how you got interested in a little bit more? You said you heard about it before effective altruism in those different scenes. Can you tell me what are some of the stories of you when you first heard about AI safety problems?
Yeah, it would have been back in 2000. So at the time, I was living in South Korea, but I was an English teacher and had no real connection to the world of tech or the world of AI research or even much to do with like charity or anything like that. But a friend of mine suggested I check out this forum called lesswrong.com, which some of the listeners might know about the rationalist community, which has some overlap with effective altruism. I didn't really participate in any ways. I don't think I posted on the forum, but I thought some of the writings were pretty interesting. The posters on Less Wrong were thinking about AI risk for quite a long time. If I remember correctly, the purpose of the community was originally, Eliezer Yudkowsky set it up to try to get people interested in AI risk. So yeah, but in 2015, just kind of a friend of mine was like, oh, you might find some of the material you're interesting. And that's what kind of clued me in. So I was mainly reading a few posts there, and then I was introduced to Slate Star Codex, the blogger Scott Alexander, who now posts at Astro Codex 10. He writes some excellent blog posts. And that was what first got me thinking about AI risk. And shortly after that, I also found 80,000 Hours and found the content there quite interesting. Now, at the time, I was convinced pretty quickly that this question of how will things go once we build things smarter than us was going to be like the really important thing that humans ever do. Like I thought this was going to be the number one issue, but I thought this was a distant future thing, like several generations from now, like maybe my grandkids will have to deal with that. So I didn't really do much about it. I also didn't think that I could contribute in any meaningful way, but I just thought, okay, this is an interesting thing I'm going to keep my eye on for a while. And so for about I think 5 years or so, but didn't really do anything about it. And after I shifted careers and started working in tech, I got a bit of an income. I started contributing to some projects. And then 2 years ago, I actually made the shift into working on it full time.
Wow. So it took you a while to go from, oh, this is a thing in the world, like something that could be bad, to then fully engaging with it. Yeah. It took you some years to go from thoughts to complete commitment.
Yeah, well, there were several barriers in my mind to me actually working on it. Like first was that this is a problem that people can meaningfully work on now, essentially between 2015 to 2024. My expectation of when this significant technological change will happen, my estimations of that have come down. I think it's going to happen sooner than I expected earlier. So before I thought it was just too early to really work on it for most people. I also didn't think that I personally could make a dent because the only work that I knew about going on in the space involved people with far better technical skills than me, people who, I thought you had to have like a PhD in math or computer science or something, and I have a background in the humanities. So it didn't occur to me that there was anything I could personally do. A few years later, I realized, okay, well, I could contribute money to some of this research going on. And then, it was a couple of years after that, I mean, partly it was some developments that go on my side where I felt more confident that I could make a meaningful dent here. And then partly was the field matured a little bit more. So there was a need for people who could do things like do community organizing and that kind of thing, which is what I've been more involved in.
Yeah, so there's the two things happening. There's your personal relationship to the issues, and there's also the community around it. So you find yourself in an intersection where there's a place for this work to occur.
Yeah, exactly. It was both an internal thing and an external thing.
Yeah. Do you recall some of the stories, the claims, the problems, the conversations from the early stages of your involvement with artificial intelligence and how it could pose risks and rewards? Are there any conversations that you remember from that sparked it for you that you're like, oh shit? Or
Back when I registered 2015. Well, the thing is, I had no one to talk to about it in real life. I think it was the first time I actually discussed it with someone in person was like only a few years ago, because like my entire kind of community and peer group at the time, it didn't really have much of an interest in this stuff. Like even the friend who recommended the forum to me stopped reading it soon afterwards. But at the time, like I just never thought really deeply about the implications of smarter than human intelligence. For me, it seemed you didn't have to do a lot of convincing to me to A, realize that it's going to be really important once humans are no longer the smartest things on the planet, and B, that it may be hard to control something that is more intelligent than you are. Like that seems a priori a very difficult problem. Yeah, and like I don't even know how I would go about solving that. It seems like there are some people working on it, and they're saying they have no idea how to go about solving it. So yeah, it wasn't a terribly complex argument that got me thinking when this happens, it's going to be really important. The more complex, many factors that changed my mind had more to do with how the field would progress and at what pace. The core question of how important is it that we get this right, it seemed quite apparent to me pretty simply, pretty early on.
Yeah. I can imagine like starting to read these articles and it kind of just slowly sinking in that like, oh, this is important. This can't just sit here. And it sounds like you got activated gradually. And were
Yeah,
there
I do.
some people that like you in your early stages of this experience of like kind of getting into less wrong and into effective altruism, any of those things, that like there are people who kind of helped guide you along the way or
Not
guide you along
really.
towards
Oh,
where you're at?
I was kind of on my own for the first 6 or 7 years. Like I read a lot of the articles on 80,000 hours as well, which I actually remember taking. They had at one point like an aptitude quiz. I think they've since removed it, but back then you could take a quiz where you kind of describe yourself and what types of skills you have and interests you have, and then it recommends a career for you. And this, yeah, would have been 2015, 2016. And it suggested early stage startup employee. And I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, why would a startup want me? Because again, I had like a humanities degree. I studied classics in university and I'd spent a few years teaching English in South Korea. And I was like, I don't really know how to code or to like, build software. I eventually moved on from English teaching. I did so by joining early startups. First, I was working in the Bitcoin industry before I moved on to AI. But I remember years later thinking, okay, I guess those guys at 8,000 hours kind of knew what they were talking about. Yeah, like, and there was no person I talked to. It was just I would read the material. I would listen to a couple podcasts now and then. And again, I wasn't engaging with it really regularly. I wasn't posting on the forums, but every now and then I would check back, be like, oh yeah, okay, this seems like an important thing to keep my eye on. But I mean, I also had like kind of just like personal difficulties to work out of time before I kind of felt like I could contribute, beyond just like feeling like I didn't have the right skills. Like I was dealing with some like mental health difficulties at the time that I needed to get over before I could really start thinking about helping the broader world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds like you've come out crashing the gates by engaging with artificial intelligence, safety. Maybe we can talk a bit about AIGS now and kind of like the blossoming
Sure.
of that experience.
Yeah, well, I'll give a bit of background for how I got between like, English teacher reading about this stuff and being convinced it's a problem to actually, helping co-found projects. So yeah, 2015 was when I first started reading about this. 2018, I had spent the last year getting very interested in Bitcoin through a meetup group run by a friend of mine. He became a friend after I joined the meetup group. So in 2018, I moved back to Canada. I was living in Victoria, working for a startup called Blockstream, where I was doing a combination of customer support and marketing stuff. And this is the first time I had a pretty substantial income, like jumping, when you're teaching English, I think I was getting paid about 25 grand a year, which went a long way in Korea at the time. I didn't have to pay rent, but it's not a tremendous amount of money. And then suddenly I was working for a startup that, had a lot of generous compensation. And I was like, great, okay, I actually have money I can start contributing to causes this way. So I took the Giving What We Can pledge and started donating a portion of my salary to, some of it was to some AI safety labs. And so between 2018 and 2022, I spent 3.5 years working for two different startups in the Bitcoin industry. I moved from Victoria to Toronto and was just kind of keeping half an eye on what was going on in the AI space. And then in early 2022, it seemed like there was a bit of an inflection point. This was around when GPT-3 had come out. ChatGPT hadn't dropped, but it seemed like timelines were shrinking. Stuff was accelerating. There were a few things came together. Like one, just like the general kind of vibe on the effective altruist forums, on Less Wrong, on the sources that I knew were talking about this were like, okay, there's been a significant advance going on in AI. This is going to come sooner. So that kind of really got me to pay attention. There was also a really good report by Ajay Kotra from Open Philanthropy about biological anchors. It's like a 400-page report on trying to estimate when we'll get transformative AI by comparing it to biological intelligence. And I didn't read the whole report, but I read as much of it. I read a few summaries of it, and I was like, hey, this seems like a pretty convincing case that this stuff's going to happen within my lifetime. And then another thing that happened is I remember I'd been gradually following more and more effective altruists and AI safety people on Twitter. And one of them was Frances Lawrence, who I don't think she does this anymore, but at the time she had like AI safety community builder in her Twitter profile. And I was like, that's a job? People do that. I was like, oh, okay. That seems like a thing I could do. It was a bit of a light bulb moment of like, oh, there's work to be done that doesn't require deep technical research. So yeah, I decided I would try to switch careers I plan to do it over the next couple of years. So I started taking some online courses in linear algebra and trying to understand the technical workings of AI a bit better. And I also thought, well, before I made this jump from teaching English to working in the Bitcoin industry, that seems like a bigger jump than going from Bitcoin to AI. So I was like, how did I do that? And I remembered that, okay, well, I found a meetup group where people kind of taught me a lot of things, and that was my in. So I decided I would try to find a meetup group in Toronto to people I could study with and learn from. And I couldn't find one just looking around on my own, but I did realize there was an effective altruist meetup happening in July 2022. One of EA's big cause areas is AI safety. There may be like-minded people there. So I went to this meetup, which was very casual. It was like in a bar setting. So it was very different from the Bitcoin meetup I've been part of, which was much more studious. We kind of choose a technical topic, sit down, dig into it, whereas this meetup was more of a social one. So I went there and I was looking for the AI safety interested people. And I found a few people interested, including a guy called Giles Edkins, who I still remember telling him I was looking for like an AI safety meetup to help me upskill so I could change careers. And his eyes kind of lit up and I was like, okay, this guy seems interested. So I decided the next week I would host an AI safety meetup at my place, at my apartment. We had this kind of party room we could use, and people showed up. I started doing this meetup, the Toronto AI safety meetup. The original goal was just kind of for Giles and I and whoever else wanted to join us to learn about AI safety so we could contribute to the problem. And we've been running meetups every week since then, and we've kind of steadily grown, which has been nice. And I promise I'm getting to your question about AIGS. The other thing that came out of the Effective Altruist meetup was I met Liev Corin, who's the head of Effective Altruism Canada. He offered to introduce me to Wyatt Tessari-Lallier. He mentioned, I know about this guy Wyatt, he lives in Ottawa, who is working on an AI safety project based within Canada. And he suggested we have a call. So a week or two after that, Wyatt and I hopped on a call just to kind of exchange info about what we were working on. He had already been working on what would later become AIGS Canada. It wasn't officially founded or named, but he was working on the original project that would grow into that. I remember getting along quite well and thinking, okay, this guy seems to be working on some meaningful stuff. And then we didn't talk for a month or two. And in October, it was actually September or October 2022, I got laid off from my job at the Bitcoin company. At the time, there was a lot of layoffs going on in the crypto.
Dark times for Bitcoin land.
There was, and particularly in the lending industry. And the last company I worked for was called Ledin, which offered Bitcoin-backed loans. And so there was kind of a series of layoffs, and I was one of the ones cut. In my mind, I'd been like, okay, I'll do this meetup, and I'll spend a couple of years upskilling, and then try to contribute to AI safety. And then when I was laid off, I was thinking, okay, I wonder if there's a way I can get involved right away. And I remembered my conversation with Wyatt. So I gave Wyatt a call, and I said, is there enough for two people to do? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. He was definitely open to me joining him. So I booked a trip out to Ottawa. For those who don't know, Ottawa is a few hours train ride from Toronto. So I booked a trip out there and spent a few days with him where we did strategizing, and we decided we worked together pretty well.
Nothing like a train.
What's that?
Nothing like a train ride to build a bond of friendship or something.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of working together with people in person. Like remote communication is great, but like it's even better if you've got that kind of learn how to really interact like in person. You can build a lot of rapport quickly that way. And we got along quite well. And he decided he was open to having me join as co-founder to his project, AIGS. I spent about a year working full-time at AIGS starting in November 2022 when I officially joined.
That's really exciting to see the shift from a layoff to just jumping right into really meaningful stuff. Not to say that what you were doing with Bitcoin wasn't meaningful. I don't know how that was for you, but I do know that it's
quite meaningful.
That, it sounds like you're walking your values.
Yeah, well, I'm doing my best.
Yeah. Yes. I'm not knocking Bitcoin work or what you were doing before.
Thank you. I did find the work I was doing in Bitcoin to be quite meaningful. I am still a massive fan of both of the companies I previously worked for. I left on very good terms. I think that the work they're doing at Ledden to provide financial resources to people, particularly in Latin America, is really important stuff. It just seemed to me that what happens with AI seems to just going to have far more far-reaching implications. So yeah, it definitely felt like I was going from a meaningful type of work to an even more meaningful type of work.
Okay, so it's more of a stair step than a complete about face. It's not one of those like I was working for the man and in the factory, and then I said to him middle finger. It wasn't one of those.
Yeah.
Well, Mario, that's the story of you kind of getting involved with AIGS. Can I get a little quick version of what is AIGS?
Yeah, so AIGS is a political advocacy or nonprofit based in Canada that is basically making sure that Canada makes its best impact on how AI affects humanity.
What does it stand for?
AIGS is AI Governance and Safety Canada. There were kind of like efforts that coalesced to AIGS. One was trying to gather the grassroots movement that was going on in Canada already to coordinate efforts to having a positive impact on AI. And then the other was a more direct, let's try to influence what's going on with governance in Canada specifically. Wyatt has a background in politics. He spent quite some time working for the Green Party, and he understands that world quite well. I have experience with community organizing, and I really enjoy engaging with people on deep technical topics. Even though I'm not a good fit for being a researcher, I really like the research and being near it and understanding it and discussing it with people. Early on, there was more of a joint mission for AIGS. It did a combination of field building and political advocacy. Since midsummer last year, AIGS has pivoted to be more focused on the governance side of things, specifically political advocacy. It made sense for the org to be a bit more focused. I spent a lot of last year doing stuff like having calls with people who were first getting clued into the issue and wondering what they can do about it. One of the things that we did was really work on search engine optimization. So if you search for AI Safety Canada, you'll find AIGS. And then you can join our Slack workspace or our newsletter. And if you joined, I would offer to have a call. And so I talked to definitely over 100 people over the course of a year or so, just a large variety of people, like concerned citizens to computer science students looking to get into the field, existing researchers looking to transition. There were other people involved in the political advocacy side of things, people involved in related issues that wanted to collaborate. So a lot of the work was simply talking to people, finding out what their concerns were and helping them know how they could contribute. Meanwhile, Wyatt, based in Ottawa, is working more on the political side of things. Yeah.
Mario, it sounds like you're really getting a front row seat to Canadian people's concerns about what is going on in advanced technology.
Yeah.
What are some things you're finding? You described most demographics. What are some moods that you're getting from the people? If you were to put it together and sum up, how is Canada feeling about AI?
A very strong strain of people were concerned and they wanted to know what they could do to help. I did meet some people that were a bit more kind of panicked about it almost, but there was a lot of really pragmatic, hey, I noticed this is a real thing. How can I contribute? Which is really encouraging to see. And it was also interesting, this inflection point, before and after early 2023. Because, before ChatGPT came out and I told people what I was transitioning into, people were kind of like, oh, that's a thing? Or you can see how people were a little this guy watched 20 minute movies. Whereas after, ChatGPT comes out, the technology seems more real. And then there was a lot of media press, a lot of more statements from people like Joshua Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton in early 2023, letting people know this is a very real issue. And then after that, there's a lot of gratitude people expressed. People were very okay, I'm really glad you're working on this. I'm really glad someone is working on this. So yeah, that was a really nice, encouraging thing to see. We would get a lot of verbal and vocal support. Some people would donate money, which was tremendously important. That's how we could keep going as an org. It was also nice to get such a variety of people as well. Like, we had, sometimes it was a bit, I wish I could help people more, direct them like to where they could help get clued in, because it is a very difficult issue to know how to help. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
it can, know what efforts are actually moving the needle. And, for some people, it was a bit more obvious. Like, if I was talking to someone who was, graduating from computer science that year and wanted to know what sort of subfield of AI technical research to go into, I could, talk to them about interpretability or like,
Yeah.
AI safety debates or these different technical fields, and introduce them to people in their area or who would be willing to have calls on them about it. That was very clear. But like, I remember one call with someone who was like, she was around, 50 years old and had like, I think a sales job in like some, like a telecom company. And, wasn't in a position to change, their career, but was very concerned about this issue. And like, for there, we kind of say things like, well, you can, if you have any money to contribute, like this is what we're using it for right now. But yeah, so sometimes it could be a bit, uh, it takes a bit of resilience to talk to people who are very worried and aren't sure what to do. But I could see it was encouraging to get support from them. They seemed grateful that there were people working on it, and they seemed grateful for the opportunity to help. I mean, like a lot of AIGS Canada, a lot of our efforts have been funded by people who've been able to give like $20 or $30. And so I was very, very pleased to be able to direct people to some way they can contribute. And there's also this question of, because a lot of our work has to do with getting politicians to take the issue seriously and get proper legislation on the board, having people spread the word and let their members of parliament know that this is an issue they care about can also be a helpful way to do it. So yeah, it was really interesting, the variety of different ways we could direct people to make a contribution if they wanted to.
Yes, on that point, I wanted to just tell the audience that in our show notes, there will be a link to the AIGS website, and the donate button is hard to miss. So good on you for making a clear pathway for people who are interested and inspired by what you're talking about, Mario, to support what you're doing right now. Personally, I want to say that you're doing incredible work of helping people navigate their concerns and having somebody to talk to and being somebody at the other end of the phone line. As a society confronts a massive shift in how we relate to technology, having a person who's familiar with not just the techie side, but somebody who can communicate, such as yourself, that's an incredible resource. And of course, alongside that is the political side. It's so difficult right now for politicians to really grok this, that they're often, at least a lot of times, politicians aren't as tech savvy as we'd love them to be. A civil society organization such as AIGS sounds like a really helpful tool to communicate the facts on the ground to the policymakers.
I gotta say, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised with how positively governments have responded to this over the past year. I was very pessimistic about this in early 2023 because it seemed like no one was paying attention. And I remember Wyatt and I having some strategy sessions being like, okay, I think we need to focus a bit on like media outreach to try to get this issue out there. And we did have some success with that. Like we got him onto daytime TV. We got some op-eds written in prominent newspapers in Canada. And we were part of what was a much bigger push for proper public attention on this issue, including things like the Center for AI Safety got a letter signed by a lot of different individuals. Same with FLI. And since then, I've actually been very pleasantly surprised that a lot of governments have stepped up and realized, okay, this is a really important thing. It seemed at the time we were kind of sleepwalking towards this, and that, the powers that be wouldn't realize anything was serious in time. That's no longer true. Now, there's definitely this question of like, what is the quality of the legislation and the actions taken by governments? And again, that's a very, very difficult, thorny problem to get right. But the question of like, oh, how do we get them to take this seriously? We've done better than expected on that front. We, as society as a whole, yeah.
Glad to hear about that. I have definitely come into this conversation, this last couple of years, long conversation, with a lot of despair that tenured politicians, ministers of parliament, and senators in the United States just have no idea what they're looking at. And I'm glad to hear some encouraging signs. Just a bit of a turn shift. I'd like to come back to this idea of how you relate to effective altruism. One thing I'd love to hear about is the degree to which you identify with it, how you relate to it as a movement, like where do you stand with it as a movement or community, or do you even call it a movement? Do you think of it that way?
I'm like, yeah, like I don't, if someone asks me if I identify as an effective altruist, I'll kind of say, I don't know, 4 out of 7 days a week I will. Meaning that like, I agree with a lot of the principles in it. In general, I think labels are kind of overrated. Like, I think this is a useful philosophical framework. There definitely is a movement. There's a collection of orgs that are more or less related to the label. But, I see it as a useful kind of a community of ideas and people that see the world in a certain way and want to make a positive contribution using a certain framework. I don't think that people should make it their entire identity. I think there are definitely flaws in the movement, but overall, I think it's a massive net positive. I think EAs tend to be a little hard on themselves as well. It's almost inevitable given that one of the principles is being very rigorous and self-reflective and self-critical to make sure what you're doing is actually useful. And so I think that does result in EAs being perhaps a little bit less confident than they should be at a
Right.
very general level. Even on days where I feel like I am not an effective altruist, where I feel like the movement doesn't reflect my values as well, I still feel very supportive of EAs and very almost like protective of them. And I think that, yeah, that like, there's been a lot of extremes. There have been really, really bad things done in the name of effective altruism, and those are not okay, and they deserve condemnation. I'm happy to get into them. But I think there have been massively, massively good things that have come out of it as well. And I think, yeah, so I feel a strong sense of solidarity with the movement.
I hear you. Yeah, still, it's 2024 at time of recording, and we're still like, I talked to somebody on the phone yesterday. He said like, "Oh, effective altruism isn't that thing with that guy who stole a bunch of money, the crypto guy?"
Yeah,
I'm like, "Yes, that's us. Yep, that's us, but not him anymore. He's dead to us."
well,
So it's important to me like that we kind of like tell our stories about where we're at, and that's why I want to hear from you and people that are involved in this stuff who aren't him.
yeah, I think people should be like identify with it as much as it is useful for them to help them do what they see as good in the world, right? Like, I'm interested in good things for myself, my friends, my family, for humanity as a whole. I'm interested in what are the actions I can take that like makes the world better. I find that effective altruist ideas and communities and frameworks are very useful in a lot of ways. Sometimes they're misleading and
Yeah,
flawed. People shouldn't take them, as gospel, but net good. Yeah.
with you on that. That's a really great sum up. It's just a reasonable way to look at things, and it's not always easy and not always obvious, and that's what makes it exciting to me personally. And I also
Yeah,
like you mentioned like we kind of have that escape hatch of the open-mindedness is part of the sauce. It's in the sauce.
yeah. And I think there are a lot of ideas that are very obviously good. If you would like to donate to a global health charity, it's better to donate to one that was more effective per dollar. I think
Yeah.
this is a rather controversial idea when you say it right away. Effective altruism doesn't really get credit for it. Effective altruism didn't invent this idea. But as far as I can tell, it seems to be the collection of people that seem to take this idea most seriously. And their actions seem to back up their
Mm,
words on this particular thing. That's
word.
why I think charities like Giving What We Can and Give Well and Give Directly um, are excellent first passes at what effective altruism is good at. I think it's easy for their contributions and accomplishments to get ignored. And I think people should acknowledge those more.
Yeah. So, Mario, can you tell me about the Trajectory office in Toronto?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a project funded by Open Philanthropy to provide a co-working space for AI safety practitioners in Toronto. Myself and a colleague this was around the time I was starting the AI safety meetup here in Toronto, is we kind of realized there was a collection of individuals either interested in AI safety or already working on it in Toronto, but there was no kind of single shared space where they were working. There was a bit of stuff going on at some of the universities, but outside of there, it wasn't a whole lot. I do much better when I'm working around people. I don't like working from home. So I was already trying to find a group of people to kind of work with. And a few of us started meeting up in cafes and in like a food court. And then for a while, Effective Altruism Canada had a table at a local co-working space here, the Center for Social Innovation. So some of us worked out of there. But we ended up applying to Open Philanthropy for a grant to fund a more dedicated office space. And so starting in September, Open Philanthropy generously came through. And as of now, we have an office and we work near St. Andrew Station in downtown Toronto. There's a core group of about 10 of us who use it more regularly. And it's been really, really helpful. A lot of us have been working on different projects in the space, but we've been able to provide a lot of support for each other. We have one person contracting to Anthropic working on scalable oversight research. We have someone else working on a standards project for the EU regulation. I've been able to do some work with AIGS through there. We've also had a couple of students who are getting into the field and be able to come and contribute to the projects in their spare time to learn from the other researchers there. So it's been great to kind of act as a bit of a node for people either working in the field or looking to get involved in the field. And then additional benefit is that it's been helpful for the meetup as well. It kind of gives us a place to host people. And once people kind of come to the meetup and start learning a bit more about ASA, if you want to get involved, they can kind of connect to our office to start contributing to projects. So AIGS has gotten a couple of volunteers that way, which has been great. Yeah.
Very cool. We can add more information to the show notes for people interested in being part of the trajectory scene. What else is going on in Toronto for AI safety or effective altruism in those communities?
Well, for effective altruism, big thing coming up is AIGX Toronto, which is happening in August this year. So most of my efforts in Toronto are AI safety specifically focused. So I don't really run any effective altruist related events, even though effective altruism is clearly, there's overlap in what we do. So I'm not involved in organizing it, but I know a few of the other organizers, and everyone here is really excited to host. So that's definitely the big thing upcoming. If people are in Toronto and want to get involved in some way, you can look up our Facebook page or the Effective Altruist meetup page, and there's occasional social meetups, also some more kind of focused ones. We've done things like lightning talks or change my view type of events. But yeah, the big one coming up this summer is AIGX Toronto.
Exciting. So our applications for that are still open, aren't they, as of now?
Yes, they are. I believe you have until the end of July to apply still.
Fantastic. What an exciting time to be doing what matters the most. I wanted to ask another thing, Mario. We've worked together before, right? In coaching?
We met in Boston, didn't we?
We met at an EA conference, EA Global Conference in Boston. I heard about what you were doing. I was inspired by it. I was like, wow, this is one productive Canadian. Then we started talking about working together for coaching services. Can you tell me about how it went for you?
Sure. Elliot provides, what would you say, coaching?
I like to think of it as effectiveness coaching.
Okay. And yeah, Elliot suggested I work with him, and we had, I believe it was weekly calls for a couple of months. It was a very helpful checkup for me because, once a week I'd be talking to Elliot about what I aimed to do that week. And then I would look at, where I succeeded, where I failed, and we would do troubleshooting together to kind of trying to figure out like, hey, what tools do I have at my disposal to help me achieve X, Y, Z? And I remember it was quite helpful. Working on a couple of things like job hunts, helping get the trajectory offers set up. And yeah, it was a really helpful kind of check-in and accountability system for me, and also helping me kind of be aware of approaches I could have for solving some of these problems that I otherwise wouldn't have. So if you think that you would benefit from an effectiveness coach of some kind, I would definitely recommend people check out Elliot's services.
Stop. Thanks, Mario. Thanks for that. Wonderful. Well, thanks for saying all that stuff. It took me down memory lane. It was really great working with you, hearing about the way that you organize yourself. I was pretty inspired, and I took some cues from the way that you operate. And I was like, oh, this is... I learned a lot. I learned a lot from you too.
Awesome.
And I learned a lot today as well, about like how you got into this space and how you're really paying it forward by creating opportunities in Toronto and in Canada for people to like get a clue on what is going on with AI safety concerns, like so that we have this incredible thing. Our generation we're blessed with this incredible technology that some smart people are making, and the rest of us just get to enjoy it. And it's like we can't always have nice things if we don't do our due diligence around making sure that the risks are protected as well, that we are protected from those risks of that technology. So I really appreciate you. Just like, thank you from the future for helping us get ahead of the downside risks of artificial intelligence.
Well, thank you. Fingers crossed it goes well.
Yeah. All right, my guest has been Mario Gibney. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
You know you're coaching right when you start taking your own advice. Honestly, my productivity spiked when I started working with Mario. Thanks, mate, for the kind words about our sessions. For those of you who might be interested in receiving coaching sessions from me, check out my website, elliottbillingsley.com, which is linked in the show notes. While I hope you enjoyed this conversation, I really want to slow down for a moment and kind of drive home the seriousness of what we're talking about here. the guy who Mario mentioned, who started Less Wrong, Eliezer Yudkowsky, is an extraordinary thinker and writer. His metaphors are like masterpieces. The way he uses like language, and it's just so eloquent. I recommend you check out his extensive, insightful writings. I don't want to get reductionist, but I think it's pretty fair to say Yudkowsky is like a doomer. He's an AI doomer. He's pretty pessimistic about where we're at, where we're going, what we can do about it. He's like, we're hosed, and the best thing we can do is to die with dignity. And that's like the best case scenario. Because artificial intelligence is just really dangerous, according to Yudkowsky. This is heavy stuff. Simply confronting the prospect that what may be humanity's greatest invention, general artificial intelligence, AGI, artificial general intelligence, may kill or torture us, the upcoming generation, our descendants, our children, beyond our worst imagination. It's a psychological quagmire. It can be super depressing. It can be disempowering. It can be really painful. So if you're experiencing dread, despair, anxiety, as you observe AI becoming more and more capable, I encourage you to talk to someone about it. Talk to a person. Don't go like talking to computers about it. I mean, maybe that'll help. But go to a meetup like the one that Mario is hosting. Go to your city. Get in touch with a person who knows a little bit more than you about how this works, and seek people who have a little bit more knowledge, and do your own studies as well. And grieve. Grieve publicly. Grieve so that you can move on. Grieve and don't skip grief, because this is real and change is happening quickly, and it's not normal. It's not typical, and the world is changing quickly. So give some space to your psychology, give some space to your soul as you confront these things. And when you're ready, you can consider going out there and doing something about it. Read the AIGS white papers now, join the Slack, get involved, organize your own meetups, conversations, but don't skip the part where you let your heart connect it, and because the heart works a little slower than the head, and let that happen. Yeah. Anyway, that was my soapbox. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think? This show is on all the social media platforms, so please drop a note there, DM me. This podcast is a truth-seeking one. This is about seeking truth. So if you're listening to this and you disagree, I'd love to hear you out. And let's keep the conversation going. It's so important to talk about these things that are on the forefront of our society. That's the fifth recommendation from the AIGS white paper, is that it needs to be a national conversation, if not global. Later on, we'll keep you posted on what AIGS is up to, what stories they're following, and their recommendations for actions to keep us all safe while enjoying the abundance that AI can enable for our society. Okay, one more thing before I go, y'all. Part of how we're measuring the success of our podcast is how much attention or donation money we help direct towards the amazing organizations who we feature. So if you reach out to the AIGS Canada team, please be sure to just tell them that the Affecting Our Altruism podcast sent you. That's enough for me. Thanks for listening.